Well, good morning. Do we have any visitors this morning? From where? Chicago. I hear it's cold there right now, is it? They said it was 40 yesterday. Anybody else? Okay. Today, we find ourselves in the fourth Sunday of Easter. And so the celebration of Easter continues. But there's a little change in the focus today. The first two readings today have to do with St. Peter. The first one is from the book of the Acts of the Apostles, and it talks about what Peter is doing in the early days following the resurrection and Pentecost, how he is preaching fearlessly to the people around him. The second reading is written by Peter himself. Peter stands as a testimony to what grace can do, what the resurrection, the effect of the resurrection in the life of an individual. And so he stands for us as a paradigm of what the resurrection and what Christ's grace can do for each of us as individuals. We know perhaps more about Peter's personality than any other apostle in the Gospels. Peter, you remember, was all bluff and bluster. He was always, he had very bad impulse control. He was one who spoke out at the wrong time. He tried to divert Jesus from going to Jerusalem. Jesus called him Satan. He said, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter was the one who denied Jesus outside the high priest's garden where Jesus was being tried. Peter was the one who said, "Lord, I will never, all the others will leave you. I will never leave you." But he did. So Peter stands as a kind of a paradigm for you and for me. You know, I would imagine, I don't know this, but I would imagine that Peter dieted. Don't worry, I'll lose 40 pounds. And we never do we? So, Peter then stands as the basic human paradigm for all of us, of how we lose track so easily, of how we are all excited about a cause one moment and very cool towards it the next. He is the epitome of human emotion. But we see a much different Peter in the post-resurrection time. We see a much different man. Once he has experienced the risen Christ, once he has experienced the power of Christ in the resurrection, we see a much different man. And in those two readings, we see a fearless preacher who is preaching so eloquently. Now, this was not an educated man. He was a fisherman in a very small little town in the backwashes of the Roman Empire. This was not a sophisticated man. This was not a man who probably, before the resurrection, had ever traveled more than about 100 miles from his home. And yet the resurrection transformed him into an eloquent preacher and into a theologian. That the resurrection transformed him into a committed Christian. This man who could not withstand the questioning of the high priest's maidservant in the garden, who collapsed under that little bit of pressure, now stood against all who would persecute him, stood up and spoke the message of Christ. Well, what happened? Where did all this come from? Where did this change come from? It came from the power of the resurrection. It came from the fact that he experienced the resurrection, that he was drawn into the mystery of Christ, and his life changed. The journey is the same for you and for me. That if we do not get drawn into the resurrection, if we do not fully allow ourselves to be affected by what God has done for us, then we will never change. We will die chubby because we'll continue to diet and never accomplish. We need to accept the resurrection. And what is it? It is a message from God that our lives do not end. It's a message from God that this is a womb in which we live, that we are preparing and growing and moving towards another reality. And in that reality, we will be one with our Creator. We will lose all limitation. There'll be no pain. There'll be no sorrow. But we have to prepare. We have a choice. We have to decide to walk through the narrow gate. It's a choice. And it's a choice that's freely offered to us here. You know, they used to say about, do you remember who W.C. Fields was? He was a comedian in the early part of the last century, and he was known because he hated little kids and a bunch of other things, but he was a miserable old man is what he was. And they say on his deathbed he asked for a Bible, and somebody said to him, W.C., what would you do with the Bible? Certainly you weren't a prayerful man during your life. And as he paged through the Bible, he said, I'm looking for a loophole. The choice is up to us now. How we live our lives now determines how we will live in eternity. If the resurrection is real for us, then we, like St. Peter, have a paradigmatic shift in our lives. Things begin to change. The focus is not on us anymore, on our desires, on our hopes, on our dreams, but our focus is on the Lord. And as we see the Lord rise from the dead, and as we see him ascend into heaven, we are drawn toward him. Our commitment strengthens, our faith increases, and our hope becomes limitless. If we don't do that, if we don't attach ourselves to the resurrection, then we will just continue to be bound by our indecision, by our weaknesses, by our addictions, by all that holds us bound. If our hearts are filled with anger, if our lives are filled with stops and starts, it's time for us to embrace the resurrection. And when we embrace the resurrection and focus on the Lord and follow him from death to life, all else will change. But the issue is that we don't take time to do it. We don't think about it. We don't take time to think about it, that we are not going to live forever in this world. And how we live here determines how we spend eternity. You, my friends, and me are in the vestibule of heaven. Whether we go in is our choice. The invitation has been made. Christ has offered it. It's up to us to accept. And like Peter, who was weak and vacillating and always stopping and starting and never could quite get everything moving in one direction, once he encountered the risen Christ, his life changed. Look for the risen Christ. Concentrate on it. Pray about it. And understand the magnitude of what that means. A man who was dead rose and walked the earth again and said, "As I have done, so shall you." The resurrection, it can change us. Be at peace.